for folks to start recording now. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's take a moment to agree on a couple of guidelines. We did this last time. As always, by now, we know that Zoom is the tool that is allowing us to transcend time and space and to be together. And it's always a good thing to just review some Zoom etiquette. If you can stay muted, that will be super helpful, but also use all of the tools that you can in order to participate, whether that is participating through the chat or participating through reactions, whatever works for you. We want to hear from you for sure. If you're sending messages in the chat, we invite you to be kind and respectful towards other fellow community members. The chat is being monitored by my amazing colleagues and Catholics for Choice staff. So if anyone is causing disruptions in the chat, we'll bring it to your attention. And if that doesn't change, we'll have to remove you from the Zoom call. So to that end, just a couple of agreements. We're asking that you engage in active and respectful listening, and that we're here, right, sitting with a lot of really things to grapple with. So be in that active and respectful listening. We also invite you to choose curiosity. I had a colleague I really love this invitation that said, always when in doubt, turn to wonder. So when we choose curiosity, rather than criticism or judgment, we build bridges instead of barriers. If someone expressed an opinion that is different or even opposed to yours within this space, turn to curiosity and ask questions. I've had so many good conversations with partners in the movement that have with great relationships, right, that have started in a moment that we both chose curiosity. The next one is that we're all experts of our own experience, and we celebrate your expertise. But that is what it is, right? It is your lived experience, and we want you to be here with all that you are, and we invite you to extend the same kindness to others. Lastly, last two ones, LS is for liberatory language. And like we mentioned last week, we are very, very intentional with the language that we use. If you have questions about language, I invite you to schedule a one-on-one with me, have a conversation, and we can go deeper into the why we use particular and specific language. But please know that we have definitely put a lot of intention and thinking into this. And lastly, share the miracle, but not the saint. We're in a community space. We're going to ask you, to bring your experience, to bring your story to this place. It's always a good thing to share what you learned and share the miracle, but not the saint, or ask the saint if they are okay with you sharing that story. Those are our basic agreements. Very quickly went through them because we were a little bit more in depth about it last week. So I'm asking for you all are you all good with that? Do I see some thumbs up? Actually, why do I not see? Great, I can see now some of y'all. Amazing. Great. As your organizer and facilitator, I will return to these agreements when we need to return to center and recommit to them. And at this time, before we turn to prayer, in the email that we sent you, we asked, right, if you had a moment to name and think about an activist that inspired you, a person in your community that really was the face for you of what being in a social justice kind of space with integrity, and who is that person for you? It can be someone that you know today, or it can be someone that lived many years ago, but this is a great time to bring them into the space. Today, we're going to be talking about the anti-choice opposition. So I thought that it will be a really good thing for us to kind of ground in people that inspired us, before we go into this difficult topic. So feel free to share them in the chat. If that feels right, just think about them, bring them into your awareness as we start our time together. So share them if you feel so inclined in the chat, or just speak their names. So we go into this session today accompanied by folks that are an inspiration to us in the movement. I am bringing today my great-grandmom, who was a community leader, made sure that everyone had what they need, and was truly a person of justice and service. So I'm bringing Emilia into the space, and thank you folks for naming your activism, the people that inspire you. I appreciate it. So with that, we turn to prayer, and I'm delighted to introduce my colleague, Lauren, who will lead us in prayer today.
Good evening, everyone. I am so excited to be leading y'all in centering and in prayer this evening. I'm a huge fan of the Mystics. I've always been so just drawn to their writings and their poetry. So I thought today our opening blessing and prayer would be so appropriate to have Saint Teresa of Avila to be our activist, our namesake to bring into this space. So let us pray. Christ has no body but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks, compassion on this world. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands with which he blesses all the world. Yours are the hands, yours are the feet, yours are the eyes, you are his body. Christ has no body now but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eye with which he looks compassion on this world. Christ has no body now on earth but yours. Amen.
Thank you, Lauren, so much. And without further ado, Shannon, if you can just take us into a journey to learn more about the anti-choice opposition.
Absolutely, I can. Thank you so much, Lauren, for that beautiful opening prayer. And to all of you for being with us today. I know that this is not, talking about our opposition is not the most fun topic, but I hope to end on a message of hope. So before we dive into today's history lesson, let's just begin with a quick level set about the current state of abortion access in the United States and the dire crisis that began long before the Supreme Court's decision this summer. Numbers don't lie. In this instance, the numbers that you see on your screen have the real life impact of blocking access to essential reproductive health care across the country, particularly for people of color working to make ends meet. 108 abortion restrictions were enacted in 2021, and that marks the worst year since Roe versus Wade was decided in 1973. This year, an additional 541 restrictions were introduced in 42 states between January and May, as anti-choice lawmakers prepared for the fall of Roe and Casey. Now, this devastating decision has authorized 26 states across the country to ban abortion entirely. Several of these new restrictions were expressly modeled on Texas Senate Bill 8, which took effect over a year ago on September 1st, 2021. So unfortunately, Texans post-Roe reality began early and gave us a preview of what was to come. So this despicable policy was designed to evade judicial review and to turn people against one another, basically, by offering significant monetary benefits to anyone willing to sue those who help Texans to get abortion care. Finally, as I'm sure you all know, on June 24th, a majority of the mostly Catholic United States Supreme Court upheld Mississippi's ban on abortion care after 15 weeks of pregnancy. But they didn't stop there, callously but succinctly summarizing the 213-page opinion in a few devastating sentences. Quote, "The Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. Roe and Casey are overruled, and the authority to regulate abortion is returned to the people and their elected representatives," unquote. So this current fight for bodily autonomy that we're in the midst of is nothing new. It's founded in a history of Christian nationalist, white supremacist, anti-feminist control of women and pregnant people's bodies and reproduction. So how exactly did we get here? And we can go to the next slide. It should go without saying that the Supreme Court didn't invent abortion or even legal abortion in the US when it announced its decision in Roe nearly 50 years ago. Abortion has been a part of life in America since the beginnings of our country and part of life worldwide throughout history. In fact, the oldest known medical text from Egypt dates to 1850 BCE and includes a recipe to prevent pregnancy. Another medical scroll from around 1500 BCE listed a formula to cause a woman to stop pregnancy. So for much of history, women and people who could get pregnant relied on herbs and plants believed to prevent pregnancy or to cause uterine cramping resulting in miscarriage. Surgical abortions were very rare. And who did they most often turn to for this care? Other women. Midwives, botanic specialists, herbalists, homeopathic practitioners, and other abortion providers. But as time went on, doctors who had been educated at medical schools saw these practitioners who had less formal training as threats to their livelihoods and moved to set themselves apart while driving their competitors out of business. So in 1847, the American Medical Association was established to create ethical standards and oversee medical education. Of course, reproductive healthcare workers were met with particular scrutiny by the AMA, and the services they provided were phased out or usurped by medical doctors who had only just begun to study obstetrics. So let's be clear, the AMA was composed of male doctors who granted themselves the power to decide when abortion could be performed legally, but who at this point lacked any experience in pregnancy or reproductive health. And in 1851, the association launched a study of criminal abortion, which led to them actively petitioning state legislatures to outlaw abortion care and to criminalize the women who were providing it. By 1880, all states had laws to restrict abortion, with exceptions in some states to save the life or health of the patient or for therapeutic reasons. And even then, only with the permission of their doctor or other state health officials. What's more, as immigration to America increased, so too did the restrictions and bans on abortion care. White, wealthy men in power devised these oppressive laws with the intention of increasing the birth rate among white upper-class women. Eventually, by 1910, abortion was illegal throughout pregnancy in every US state. So the bottom line here is, from their very beginnings, abortion bans were explicitly created to control women and people who can get pregnant, to block them from providing reproductive health care, thereby preserving the careers of white male doctors, and to regulate their bodies, thereby preserving the privileged status and power of the white upper class. Again, to state the obvious, outlawing abortion did not stop pregnant people from seeking the care that they wanted and needed. Instead, much like today, banning abortion forced pregnant people to try to manage their own abortions or to risk their health, well-being, and lives to procure often unsafe abortions. The continued prevalence of legal abortion is unfortunately easily discerned by the number of deaths that were attributed to unsafe care. In 1930, abortion was listed as the official cause of death for almost 2,700 women. That's 18% of maternal deaths recorded in that year. The eventual decrease in the death toll was linked to advancements in medical understanding and to the development of antibiotics. But nevertheless, as illegal abortions became safer, so did childbirth. So that means that illegal abortion still accounted for roughly the same number of deaths attributed to pregnancy and childbirth every year. And once again, much like today, women who were working to make ends meet and people of color were disproportionately impacted by abortion bans and more likely to die as a result of illegal, unsafe abortions. Over time, doctors began to recognize and push back against this unconscionable disparity. So Dr. Alan Guttmacher, who's the namesake of the Guttmacher Institute, whose statistics we rely on a lot in this movement, was a young doctor in Baltimore in the 1920s, when a state law in Maryland prevented him from helping a 14-year-old whose father had raped her. The district attorney refused to authorize an abortion, and she gave birth to her father's child. Shortly thereafter, the wife of one of Guttmacher's colleagues was permitted to have a therapeutic abortion because she was underweight. So a common saying at the time was, quote, "the rich get richer and the poor get children," unquote. Guttmacher later wrote that, quote, "abortion above all else in American medicine reeked of class privilege," unquote. So in 1942, Guttmacher pushed for a change to state abortion laws that would allow doctors to consider cases where pregnancy threatened a woman's health, not just her life. So as the divide between state abortion laws and the real need for safe, essential reproductive health care grew, doctors and lawyers began to advocate for reform. Planned Parenthood Federation of America brought 43 men and women together in April 1955 for the first ever in-depth conference on abortion, where they discussed the legal, medical, and human aspects of reproductive health care and gained insight into the racial and economic disparities that continue to plague access to these services. Support for abortion legalization continued to grow in light of the fallout surrounding thalidomide, which was a drug that was prescribed to ease pregnancy symptoms that was eventually found to cause severe birth defects. Many of those who ingested thalidomide were unable to access abortion care in the US, forcing them to travel outside of the country and amplifying calls for legal reform. By the late 1960s, healthcare providers, clergy, legal professionals, activists had banded together to advance reforms in state legislatures and in the courts. So between 1967 and 1973, 4 states, which you can see on the map on the next slide, those include Alaska, Hawaii, New York, and Washington, repealed their abortion bans entirely. And 13 other states enacted reforms that expanded exceptions, permitting abortion in instances where pregnancy was dangerous for the physical or mental health of the patient, fetal abnormalities, or when the pregnancy resulted from rape or incest. We can go to the next slide. The US Catholic bishops closely observed this reform movement and began to take action to stop its progression. For hundreds of years, the Catholic Church had not considered abortion murder until quickening. St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, both doctors of the church, believed that the fetus did not become a person or ensouled until later in pregnancy. For much of the church's history, popes made clear distinctions between ensouled and unensouled fetuses. Even today, although it doesn't condone abortion, the Vatican has said definitively that it does not know when a developing life becomes a person. The Vatican's prohibition on abortion is much more recent than most people realize, and it was not codified until 1917. The bishops seized this opportunity to spread the church hierarchy's opposition to abortion and established the Right to Life League. Later, the National Right to Life Committee, and to coordinate its state campaigns in 1967. But the hierarchy was in the radical minority among religious traditions in their resistance to birth control and abortion. When the Supreme Court legalized abortion in 1973, evangelicals saw this as a Catholic issue. The Roe versus Wade ruling came with little fuss from non-Catholic religious groups. However, under the banner of the religious right had already begun to form well before the Roe versus Wade decision under the banner of a different issue, and that is segregation. In the late 1960s, they launched what came to be known as the Southern Strategy, a political effort that was meant to lure Southern white Democrats frustrated with desegregation to the Republican Party. To attract these voters, right-wing religious groups distorted religious freedom to maintain segregation in schools. Evangelical religious leader Jerry Falwell, who called the civil rights movement the civil wrongs movement, had established a segregation academy in 1967. Marley, can you go to the next slide, please? And another one. And one more. Thank you. And Bob Jones, a fellow evangelical zealot who opened a segregated university, said that, quote, God is the author of segregation, unquote, and called anyone who had disagreed a, quote, satanic propagandist or religious infidel who wanted to overthrow the established order of God. So by segregating schools and indoctrinating students, they hope to create a new generation of conservatives who could continue to fight for their traditional values. By the early 1970s, the IRS began to threaten to rescind the tax-exempt status of these church-sponsored whites-only academies. That's when Paul Weyrich, who's a conservative activist and architect of the religious right, who later founded the Heritage Foundation, had an idea that affects all of us to this very day. He realized that the racist defense of segregation was not going to mobilize grassroots evangelical voters. So he flipped the script and made it an issue of religious freedom. Weyrich, Falwell, and other white supremacist evangelical leaders energized others around the country around the claim that government interference in their beliefs was an assault on their religious liberty. Next slide, please. At the same time, the Supreme Court was asked to resolve a dispute over a Texas law, making it a crime to attempt to get an abortion unless not necessary to save the mother's life. At the same time, similar statutes governed in a majority of states, despite the beginnings of the reform movement. The Supreme Court changed this by holding in 1973's Roe versus Wade that the constitutional right to access pre-viability abortion care without excessive government restriction. The justices also established the trimester framework, allowing states to place increasing restrictions on abortion corresponding to the gestational age of the fetus. So in the first trimester, accessing abortion care was understood as a private medical decision between the pregnant person and their provider. Here, the court firmly grounded the constitutional right to abortion care in the right to privacy. So in Roe, the court afforded the strongest protection for the right to access abortion in its history, and that remained in place for the next 19 years. On the next slide, meanwhile, the radical Christian rights plan to maintain segregation as their galvanizing issue worked well until the 1970s. But as public support of the racist policy began to decline, even their religious freedom claim couldn't get traction. And white Christian leaders became uncomfortable rallying voters around segregation. The evangelicals realized that they couldn't continue to attract a movement to preserve the tax advantages of racist institutions, and they needed a new crusade. During the midterm elections of 1978, Catholic anti-abortion activists leafleted church parking lots in 4 Senate races during the final weekend of the campaign. That's in New Hampshire, Iowa, and 2 races in Minnesota. 2 days later, in a midterm election with very low turnout, pro-life Republicans defeated the favored Democratic candidates. Paul Weyrich, that right-wing strategist extraordinaire that we were talking about, was dazzled. He had found what he called a respectable issue to rally recruits for the right wing. So in 1979, Weyrich and evangelical leaders held a conference call to to discuss pivoting to new issues that would keep their momentum going. They discussed several possibilities, including pornography and prayer in schools. Then one leader on the call suggested abortion, and the idea stuck. Evangelical leaders realized that they could join forces with the Catholic hierarchy, which had officially condemned abortion in the late 1800s. So by reorienting the Southern strategy and combining Catholics and evangelicals into one powerful voting bloc, they devised a horrible new plan to consolidate political power among a small group of white Christian men. Abortion was an issue that could rile up people of all ages and political leanings. So it cannot be said enough. The invention of abortion as a political issue emerged in the late 1970s out of a desire to maintain white Christian male power over politics and society. It was not a direct reaction to the Roe versus Wade decision. Weyrich and Falwell knew that abortion was a potent political force capable of altering the direction of the country. But in order to make their plan work, they had to launch a misinformation campaign, since abortion had not been much of a political issue up to that point. The leaders of this movement also had to tell a blatant lie, that Christianity and abortion had always been incompatible. In 1979, Falwell gave his first anti-abortion sermon making this claim. So the evangelical pivot to abortion led to untold influence in politics. In 1980, Ronald Reagan's campaign against incumbent Jimmy Carter was failing. He was visited by Falwell and Weyrich, who convinced him to embrace an anti-abortion stance. The move made his campaign soar and led to his election as the 40th president of the United States. This is somewhat ironic, since as governor of California, Reagan had signed a bill that legalized abortion in the state in 1967. Abortion gave evangelicals like Falwell and Weyrich a powerful seat at the table. And they've been there ever since. So moving on to the next slide, Planned Parenthood versus Casey. After Roe, pressured by the combined forces of Catholic and evangelical anti-choice extremists, states continued to enact abortion restrictions. One of those was the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act of 1982, which included many provisions that we still saw in many laws today. That's a 24-hour waiting period, parental consent, reporting requirements, and the spousal notification requirement. In 1992, the Supreme Court issued a fractured decision, with the justices splitting evenly along ideological lines and ultimately deciding to replace the trimester framework with the undue burden standard, and to essentially overturn the entirety of the Roe decision, except its core holding. That is, that every pregnant person has the right to decide whether to continue their pregnancy prior to viability. Unfortunately, not only was the undue burden standard much weaker than Roe's strict scrutiny, but the test itself was also very vague. So it's no surprise that courts struggled to apply the undue burden test in later abortion cases. Subsequent use of the undue burden standards was characterized by legal scholars as inconsistent, confusing, and problematic. Next slide. So the lack of clarity and consistency surrounding the undue burden standard gave hostile states the opening they needed to chip away at Roe's foundational holding, while avoiding directly violating Casey and attracting the ire of the Supreme Court. These cruel and dangerous policies restricted or outright banned abortion care, limited who and the facilities that can provide care, forced providers to perform unnecessary services and to deliver inaccurate, biased counseling, mandated waiting periods, and parental interference with personal decision-making, all with the express purpose of increasing costs, decreasing the number of clinics and providers, and delaying or blocking access to care. Common types of abortion bans and restrictions which gained steam after Roe and Casey include those that are shown on your screen and described on pages 98 to 102 of the Advocate's Bible. So on the next slide, you'll see that ultimately over 1,300 abortion restrictions have been enacted since Roe was decided, including more than 500 in the last decade alone. As a result, even while Roe's protections were still in place, abortion access was decimated or eliminated in large segments of the nation, particularly for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, those working to make ends meet, members of the LGBTQI+ community, immigrants, young people, those working to make ends meet and living in rural communities, and people with disabilities. As time went on, emboldened by the Tea Party, Republican takeovers of state legislatures, and the packing of our federal courts with right-wing ideologues, the anti-feminist, Christian nationalist, white supremacist, anti-abortion movement shifted their strategy. Rather than encouraging states to enact restrictions that might survive under Roe and Casey, they demanded that legislators pass laws purposefully designed to decimate the constitutional right to abortion altogether. Next slide. One such policy is the unconscionable, cruel, and dangerous Texas Senate Bill 8, which outlawed all abortion care after 6 weeks of pregnancy, before most people even know that they're pregnant, with no exceptions for rape, incest, or the life or health endangerment. And it created a vigilante system to hunt down and terrorize anybody who helps a Texan to terminate a pregnancy. Although SB 8 is a Texas law, the negative effects that you can see on your screen rippled throughout the entire country as patients who were able to travel across state lines to access care were forced to do so. But many other Texans were unable to travel out of state and have been forced to carry their pregnancies to term or to attempt to manage their own abortions. The impact, of course, fell hardest on people living on low incomes and Black and brown communities. State legislators raced to enact copycat bills, 2 of which are currently in effect in Oklahoma and Idaho. At least 15 other states have already formally filed copycat legislation or threatened to do so. Next slide. Yet another example of a state law designed to challenge Roe was upheld in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. On March 18th, 2018, the governor of Mississippi signed a bill banning abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Within hours, the Center for Reproductive Rights filed a complaint and a request for a temporary restraining order to block the ban. Despite the fact that the ban was ruled unconstitutional by both the district and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case. This never should have happened in the first place. The Supreme Court only accepts 1% of the over 7,000 petitions that are submitted to the justices each term. Traditionally, the cases that are granted review by the highest court in the land involve disputes between federal circuit courts or disputes about Supreme Court precedent, but that was not the case here. There was absolutely no reason for the justices to hear this case. And of course, they did so anyway. And when the justice's decision was leaked on May 2nd, 2022, our worst fears were confirmed. Roe and Casey were overturned, decimating 50 years of legal precedent. The leaked draft, authored by Justice Samuel Alito, was identical to the decision officially announced by the court on June 24th, with the addition of some separate opinions by the other justices. In the immediate aftermath of the court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade, 26 states already had laws on the books or had promised to ban abortion entirely. We can go to the slide with the map. Jeopardizing access for half of the country. That's 36 million women of reproductive age, plus trans men and non-binary people, and placing an extreme burden on the providers in states still offering essential health care. The map on your screens was produced by the Center for Reproductive Rights and demonstrates in dark red that abortion is currently illegal in half of those states. That's Idaho, Arizona, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, and West Virginia. The other 13 states in bright red are deemed hostile, meaning that they have expressed a desire to prohibit abortion entirely. 3 states in the orange, that's New Mexico, New Hampshire, and Virginia, are not protected, while the blue and yellow states are our beacons of hope. Yellow states have protected access through state laws, but there are still some limitations on abortion, while blue states have expanded access, meaning that the right to abortion is protected by state statutes or constitutions, and other laws and policies have actually created additional access to abortion care. Finally, in our last slide, in other good news,
Shannon,
California, sorry, go ahead.
can you list the states that are blue and yellow, please? For our participants that cannot see the screen, please.
I'll put them in the chat later.
Okay.
In other news, California, New York, and Oregon have launched or introduced initiatives specifically to help people traveling from other states to seek care. And one of the bills that was recently passed by the House of Representatives, called the Ensuring Women's Right to Reproductive Freedom Act, would similarly safeguard the rights of any person to travel across state lines to access abortion care and protect the providers and support networks who help people to do so. The House also passed again the Women's Health Protection Act, which is a critical bill that guarantees providers the right to deliver and people the right to receive abortion care, free from medically unnecessary limitations and political interference. The Biden administration has taken nearly 20 executive actions to protect abortion access, including the Department of Justice's lawsuit against Idaho's abortion ban that I mentioned, arguing that it violates federal requirements to provide life-saving medical care. So like I said, I'm glad that we ended on a message of hope that shows where we can continue to go in the future. So now I will pass it back to my friend Steph.
Yes, thank you, Shannon. If you can add the states to the chat to make sure that everyone gets them, that will be super helpful. Thank you, Shannon, for taking us on that journey to learn about how we arrive where we arrived. I think that is super important, right? That we're not here without some of the historical context that brought us here. So let's just take a deep breath together. I don't know about you all, but when I am listening to these things, I just develop this, one like finds oneself a little tense listening to this information. So if you have let's take a moment to take a deep breath together before we move into the next part of our conversation. That is, we're going to shift gears and talk about the skill building that we're going to do today. And we're going to talk about one-on-one conversations. And we're particularly going to be talking about organizing one-on-ones. If we can start at the beginning of the presentation, that will be very, very helpful. Thank you so much. We are going to, and in the screen, you can see the Advocates Bible and the title of our session, and that is The Roots of Anti-Choice Movement. If we can move on to the next one, please. I just want to quickly bring us back to last week. We talked about base building, right? And let's imagine that we have a toolbox, right? That we're like kind of doing these sessions, putting some tools inside that toolbox. And last week we added to that toolbox base building and recruitment. We talked about what is base building, why it's important, who should be base building, and we even put on our organizing caps and did some network mapping to identify some people in our different communities that could be recruited for this movement. So just as a reminder, last week we defined base building as the long-term process of directly impacted people as well as their allies coming together for the practice of taking collective action to change specific material conditions. So policies and laws and or shift narratives. So that was a little bit of what we talked last week, and I repeated multiple times, no base, no movement, right? So you all did a great job with the exercise, and now we are excited, right, to take it a step forward. Once we not once, because we're never going to finish recruiting, but the next step for the people that we invite into this movement, we want to invite them into conversation, so we can get to know them better, but also we can move them into action and kind of invite them to join our efforts, right? So that is why today we are going to be talking about organizing 101. So people have a lot of different people have different definitions of what an organizing 101 is. And here I'm compiling 4 of my favorite kind of like not definitions, but good markers of an organizing 101. The first one is that an organizing 101 is 30 minutes to 1 hour long, right? That is the first marker of a 101. It's 30 minutes to 1 hour long. The second part of the second component of a organizing 101, I hear a little bit of echo. No, great, thank you. The second part of an organizing 101 is that it's an intentional conversation. And what do we mean by intentional conversation? It's literally that it has an intent, right? We're talking to people about a specific issue. We have an agenda. We want to talk to them about the work that we're doing. Why do we care about it, right? And why the other person should join or be moved into action. So when we say that it's intentional, it's because it has an intention. And so we said first is a 30-minute to 1 hour conversation. The second is that is an intentional meeting. The third one is with the goal of building a relationship and moving the person into action. And the fourth is that always end with an ask. So the reason that we are really making sure that we discuss some of the markers or kind of the like characteristics of a 101 is because it is different than a casual, good conversation about issues that we care about, right? I have conversations with colleagues and friends all the time about issues that I care about, and that does not mean that I'm having a 101, right? One of the things that I really appreciate about 101 as an organizing tool is that it makes our work a lot more relational, right? I, for example, email with like a lot of you, like we are exchanging emails or having virtual correspondence. But through an organizing 101, we get to sit like and have a conversation and get to know each other better and learn more about the work that we're doing at Catholics for Choice. And usually, because it's a key important part of having an organizing 101, finish the conversation with an ask. A lot of the asks that I had with some of you that attended 101s with me was to come to to Advocates Bible Study. So we had that organizing 101, got to know each other better with the goal of building a relationship and moving folks into action, and it ended with an ask. So why, right? We were just talking about the opposition. Why is it relevant or important that we talk here about, or we build the skills to have 101 with one another, right? As we seek to build a powerful and grounded and scaled movement for reproductive rights and justice that is faith-rooted, right? We want to make sure that we are basing that we are grounding that work in relationship and trust, right? That is a key part of the work that we're doing here. Another reason why we should be doing 101s, right, is that we want to move new people into action, right? So when folks reach out to us and they're like, oh, I want to learn more about Catholics for Choice, that's a great opportunity to have 101s because we get to welcome them and to our work, into our community, and move them into action. And also then, this is one of my favorite parts, why we do one-on-ones, because it is important that we hear people's stories. So I have a question for you all that I would love to hear. And I'm going to do a poll. Hopefully you will get that in a second. And the poll is asking, have you participated in an organizing 101? And the options are, I have participated. I have not had a 101 or meeting, but I'm excited to try. And the third one is, I'm curious, tell me more. So it should, can I get folks, Shannon, did you receive the poll? Awesome, great. So I'm curious to know. I see there's folks are participating, and I will give it a moment. Okay, so there is about 40-ish% of people who have participated in 101s. There is 8% of folks who have not participated in 101s, and there's 46% of folks who are curious and want to learn more. So that is very exciting. I'm curious for those folks who can share that have participated in an organizing 101, has it been here or in a different community? You can just share in the chat. So I see some folks are like talking about different organizations. So it is like I mentioned, a very well used organizing tool. And some of you hopefully had a one-on-one with me. So from that 40-ish% that folks that said that they had a one-on-one, hopefully some of you all had a one-on-one with me. I know that I have seen some of you before. Great. So we have a good mix of folks who have that experience and that, so like relational organizing, amazing. So we're going to briefly, because I want to get you all to kind of have some time to be with one another and consider different scenarios. We are going to cover really quickly the skeleton of a 101, right? We already covered what is a 101, and I like this is going to sound very similar. And we also covered why we should be having 101s, kind of what's the goal of those. So I don't want to be super prescriptive, right? But it's always a good, because this is an intentional meeting with the goal of building relationship and moving people into action. I think it's always a good idea to be prepared to have that conversation and making sure that you're covering these kind of like 4 parts. 4 is our number today. I've said 4 multiple times, I guess. So maybe 4 is the number for 101s. So during an organizing 101, I think it's always a good idea to spend some time introducing yourself. And just so you know, in a few minutes, I'm going to have a little fishbowl example with my colleague Shannon here. And I want you to pay attention to this to kind of evaluate if Shannon and I do a good job, or I do a good job having the one-on-one with Shannon, because like I mentioned, first is a good thing to have time for introductions, right? One of the main goals is to build relationship. We want to know who is the person that we're talking to, that we are in movement with, right? So having some time to do introductions and make sure that you're explicit with the person about what we're doing, right? We don't want to like trick people into having one-on-ones with us. We want to make sure that they are aware and that they know that during the conversation, we want to get to know each other more. And that at the end, I'm going to share a little bit about our organization and kind of the work that we're doing for reproductive rights and justice, and that I will probably have an ask at the end. So it's a good kind of practice to know the journey that you're taking with this person. The second part of a good one-on-one is having time, like I mentioned, to get to know each other. And this is the part where we're going a little bit deeper into our stories and why do we care? And I do my best to model that for folks, right? When we're having a conversation, to share like what brought us to this work. And I always love to hear from you all. How did you hear about Catholics for Choice? Is this the first time that you're reaching out to us, or is this something that you've been doing for decades, right? So it's always an exciting and a great thing to spend time getting to know each other better. 3, we want to make sure that we share about our work, right? Like we want to make sure that at some point we're talking about the organization or the work or the organizing, the campaign, whatever it is that we're there to talk about, and that sharing leads to inviting that person into something, making an ask. And this is a yes or no question. This is the part where I invite you to come to the Advocates Bible Study, or I invite you to come to another lobbying day, or where I invite you to do X, Y, and Z, right? So this is a yes or no question. And it is very good to have it be tied to logistics, right? So if I am sharing the details, if I'm inviting you to the Advocates Bible Study, I want to let you know when is the Advocates Bible Study to make sure that you can tell me like a truthful answer, right? Let your no be in service of your yes. If you can't make it, right, you can't make it, and I can try to find another opportunity to invite you into this work. So those are some of the 4 key components of an organizing one-on-one. And we want to definitely go into small groups. So I'm just doing a quick math here for time. Shannon, do we have some time? Maybe you are keeping up with our timekeepers.
We're good.
We'll just do a quick example of an organizing one-on-one. So pay attention here. Let's practice, and then we'll spend some time with some scenarios, and you can spend some time with one another. So I have invited my colleague Shannon to practice with me. I am the person who has invited Shannon to have a one-on-one. So I'm hosting, and Shannon is the person interested in joining our organizing work. Are you good with that, Shannon? You're active.
I'm good to go.
Fantastic. So what is it that people do with like cameras when they're going into character? Lights, camera, action. Is that what it is? Great, amazing. Lights, camera, action. The one-on-one has started. Hi, Shannon. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you, Steph?
I'm doing good. I'm just so happy to be chatting with you and so grateful for your time this afternoon. It's always great to kind of like get to know other activists. So super grateful for your leadership, for your time. So what we're going to do in the next couple of minutes is that I will love to get to know you, hear a little bit about your story and how can you ended up interested and involved in this work. I'll do the same. I would love to share a little bit about myself. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about Catholics for Choice and opportunities for you to get involved. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. Thank you so much for inviting me to have this conversation.
Of course. This is one of the most exciting things to be in movement together. So Shannon, like I mentioned, I'm Steph. I'm the organizing manager at Catholics for Choice. I'm fairly new in this role. I've only been around for, I will say 3 months or so. And I've, in a journey of different things that have brought me to this place. One of them is my seminary education, and where I studied Christian ethics and reproductive justice. But honestly, my lived experience as a Puerto Rican woman, I've always known about the need to have reproductive justice. My ancestors, my abuelas, my great grandma actually was forcefully sterilized back in the 60s. And Puerto Rican women, as you may know, the pill was tested on us. So we have such a long history of reproductive injustice and obstetric violence that I feel like it is my duty to be doing this work. So the next generation, right, and this generation, we also deserve good access as well. So that's me, went to seminary, really care deeply about this because of my ancestors. And I'm just generally fired up about this. I'm a young mom, a vocation that I decided joyfully. And yeah, how about you? Tell me a little bit about you.
Well, thanks for sharing about your story. I think I can definitely see similarities to my story because my passion for this issue also comes from my family. My grandpa actually was studying to be a priest when he met my grandma. So obviously he didn't become a priest, but he and my grandma were still very, very involved in their parish. He sang during mass every day. He was a cantor. And my grandma led my church's Meals on Wheels program, and they volunteered a lot in their community. And that's how they lived their Catholicism, was giving back to people who had less than them. So I knew that I wanted to be able to do the same and to serve my community. So I've done a lot of different volunteer programs in my community, like I've taught ESL classes, I've done Big Brothers Big Sisters, worked at soup kitchens and helped make meals for Meals on Wheels, just like my grandma did. And now I think I'm looking for something that would also, combine my interest with giving back to my community to making sure that people can access all the healthcare that they want, including abortion.
Amazing. That's so, I love grandmas and grandpas too, but like they're the best. How about Catholics for Choice? How did you learn about Catholics for Choice?
Yeah, so I think, after the Supreme Court decision, I was looking for, a home that would combine, my interest and my faith with this passion for reproductive health rights and justice. So I just Googled Catholic and abortion, and I found Catholics for Choice. And so this seemed like a good place for me to start.
Absolutely. Amazing. Yeah. So many people, I've always loved to know how folks heard about us and find us. So I'm grateful that you're here. Let me just briefly tell you, Shannon, about the work that we're doing and perhaps how you can get involved. We are having this amazing Advocates Bible Study, which is a 4 where we're doing a dive deep into this amazing resource, but also building skills that will help us grow this movement, right, and develop our leadership in this movement for reproductive rights and justice. So that is ongoing, and it's tied to some future events. Actually, one of the most exciting things for someone like you, right, that is wanting to join this movement at this particular time, is that we're hosting a one-on-one festival in December where you will get to talk to other activists as well and practice kind of those skills of having a one-on-one conversation. You will be matched with someone from your area. Hopefully, we'll are doing our best to make that happen and continue to build community. Is that something that you're interested, Shannon? Will you want to join us in December for the Festival of One-on-Ones?
Yeah, I think that sounds great. It sounds like exactly what I'm looking for, a chance to meet other like-minded people.
Amazing. I hear that so much. And I'm so grateful that you're going to be able to meet folks in December. I will make sure that I email you with the details and that I will also send you a reminder. So with the holiday schedule, you don't forget that
So
we're going
helpful.
to be amazing. Great. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Steph.
Awesome. So folks, Shannon, thank you so much for exemplifying a 101. We really wanted to do this because it's always helpful when we see it happening, right? And of course, this is a 30-minute to an hour conversation. So we just did a very, very brief one. So we are going to transition into small groups now. Before we do that, we're going to just talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing, and we invite you to be, like, it's part of building communities, also get to know folks in the community. So we're hoping that being in small groups with people will facilitate that. So while you are on your small groups, and I will let you know in a second how much time we have to do this, you're going to take a look at two scenarios. If my amazing colleagues can present the scenarios here, that will be helpful. We are going to read them so everyone knows, and I will do that quickly because I know we have to go to the small groups, but I want to make sure that everyone knows what we are going to be discussing. So we have scenario number 1 and scenario number 2. The scenario number 1 is here in the slide, and it says Martha and Addie meet at a Starbucks in Florida while their orders are being prepared. Martha is wearing a Bands of Our Bodies shirt, and Addie makes a comment about a recent rally hosted by the Florida Interfaith Coalition for Reproductive Health and Justice as she attends. They have a great conversation about abortion bans and their own personal connection to the movement for reproductive rights. Addie mentions that she is Catholic and feels particularly conflicted about the tension between her faith and her belief in bodily autonomy. Martha, who retired after teaching at a Catholic school for 30 years, shares about the work of Catholics for Choice and how we are pro-choice because of our faith and not in spite of it. Addie's coffee is ready, but before she goes, she Googles Catholics for Choice and promised Martha that she will check it out. They politely say their goodbyes, grateful for the serendipitous conversation. So what I would love for you all in the small groups is, was this an organizing 101? Why it was or why not? And just remember a little bit of the conversation that Shannon and I had and some of the things that we just discussed. We're going to do one scenario, I think, because of time. Is that good? Great.
Sure, we'll have 5 minutes in the breakout rooms.
Amazing. So please let us know if you have any questions, and I will welcome you all back. Here, folks, where did you, if someone wants to share, kind of like if you got to look at the scenario and if you chatted about whether or not it was a 101, we'll love to hear from a group, and you can raise your hand to share, or you can add in the chat, but we'll love to hear from 1 or 2 people briefly. I see Linda. Linda, can you tell us quickly, briefly, where did you land it on?
Yeah, we had Julie, Jack, and me.
Awesome.
And we briefly talked about the scenario that there was no ask. Yes. And that was crucial. Nice meeting you. Bye-bye. Right?
Yeah.
But then we started talking about ourselves and how we got interested in Catholics for Choice, and had a very, very good conversation, learning where our interests were and geographically where we were located. And so it was a great conversation. And we're going to be looking at Showing Up for Racial Justice, which is another organization. And so it was very good. It was great to meet Jack and Julie. Yeah.
Thank you, Linda. No ask. That makes me so happy. That is so perfect, right? They picked up their coffee, had a great chat, left, but nothing happened. So thank you so much. I see Anna, if you can just share with us briefly a little bit about where you landed.
So briefly, met a lady from Texas. I did not get her name. And then Annette from South Carolina. My thought was, it was a one-on-one. I think that in general, and I didn't hear too much from others, but I think in general, these are harder conversations to have, especially about faith. And so you may have to have more than one. you may need that start in conversation. You may need to, if they're looking and Googling it, for me, they are following up. So that is a part of the ask. But I think that sometimes it's a follow-up, and that may feel more comfortable for some to have multiple.
Yes, thank you so much, Anna. That is perfect, because the second scenario that we did not have, unfortunately, the time to discuss is that where they are like, when their coffee gets ready, they actually exchange numbers and have a conversation later the next week, right? So it's exactly what you're saying about following up and the importance of like, these are difficult conversations to have. So amazing. Thank you both so much for your participation. We are running out of time, so we want to make an invitation for you. I'm an organizer. I love asks, so I am going to make an ask of all of you today, and it's that we are going to host a festival of 101s where you will have the opportunity, like just now, to meet other CFC activists and get to know them. Hopefully you will like do our best to pair or like kind of match folks according to where they're located, and we're going to host that event in early December. We know that it was not realistic to invite you all to have 101s today, right? Like ideally we talk about it and then you all can like go and practice having a 101. But we know that time is of the essence, so that we didn't want to rush you all through practicing and building kind of that confidence and that skill to be in conversation, to build relationships, right? To with the goal of moving people into action, and then making sure that we're fostering a sense of community and trust in all of the good things that happen when we're having organizing 101s conversations with one another. So please register for this. It's going to be a fun holiday festival of 101s, and we'll get to practice what we learned today, as well as building community as well. Excited. I see some excitement from Anna, thinking some hearts. Appreciate your all's enthusiasm as always. This is a great, it's always, I think about how much we practice these sessions, and we're always at the end, wish we had more time together. Before we kind of wrap up our time, I want to thank you all for participating. Thank you all for going into the small groups. Thank you all for being here and being in community. Like I mentioned, please check the link and register for this event. We'll love to see you there. We are hoping to see you here next 2 weeks from today for session number 3. We're going to be talking all about values-based lobbying, and we're going to have amazing facilitators. So please return to us. In the meantime, if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to us as well. And we're grateful for your time and presence with us. And am I forgetting anything else, folks? No? Well, thank you to Shannon and to all of my amazing colleagues that have been with us this evening as well. And we wish you a really, really lovely evening.